International University are sponsoring. We are delighted to have with us two professors of some notoriety on a very interesting topic. The topic is, does life after death require dualism? For those of you who don't know, most of you do, looking out in the crowd here. From Trinity is Cliff Williams, who you're familiar with. He's from Indiana University. That's where he did his PhD, and has written numerous books. I won't go into all those details for the sake of time. And Professor Keith Yandell has graciously joined us here for the debate. He did his PhD, as I understand, at Ohio State University. And so we have a Big Ten rivalry here on Trinity's ground. I did a degree at the University of Illinois, so I should be able to moderate with some proficiency here. Here's how we're going to lay it out. We're going to flip a coin to start, in the spirit of good competition, and then we're going to give 8 minutes or thereabouts to each person for opening comments. Then we're going to have about 12 minutes for each person to ask questions of the other. If you're a mathematician, you'll know this comes out to 40 minutes, which will leave us with 20 minutes remaining for those of you out there who are dying to ask a question. You can go ahead and raise your hand. For the purposes of longevity, that is, we can have this thing on tape and so forth for future generations. If you'd be so kind as to come up after you raise your hand and are identified, come up to the microphone. That way we'll be able to hear you. So if you forget about it, that's okay. I'm sure they'll be able to repeat the question. I believe that's the format. So thank you very much. Professor Yandell, since you're our guest, would you like to make the call? Go ahead and catch it, and then that'll be it.
Okay. Yes, it is.
What would you like to do? Would you like to go first? You've got the option to make the call.
What for you? I'm happy to go either way you like. I am a little surprised at the influence of the National Football League and community college.
Our subject is, does life after death require dualism? Our subject is not, is dualism true or is Christian materialism true? However, I'd like to say that that's the background for the question is Christian materialism compatible with life after death? And my position is yes, and Professor Yandell's position is no. First, a little bit of background. Christian dualism has been the prominent position among Christians. Christian materialism has been a minority position. Some of the early church theologians in the first few centuries were Christian materialists. And recently, Christian materialism has been enjoying a revival, at least enjoying that is according to the Christian materialists. I'm not sure if it's quite accurate to say that the interlude has been one largely of Christian dualists. That's probably quite accurate. Very few Christian materialists around, but there are more in the last 20, 25 years, and that raises our question for tonight. Can the Christian materialist account for life after death? I want to give just a couple of definitions here, and Professor Yandell has agreed to amend them. Dualism is a thesis that the people consist of two sorts of substances, one matter and one non-matter. Non-material substance is often called soul or mind. Christian materialism is a thesis that, materialism is a thesis that people consist only of one kind of substance, matter, or what is physical. It is anthropological materialism. It is not atheism, and Christian materialists do not conceive of themselves as denying the existence of God, because after all, they're Christians, Christians are theists. Okay, the attack on dualism by Christian materialists has had three prongs. Number one, thesis has been put forward by Christian materialists that the Bible does not support dualism. Number two, Christian materialists claim that the philosophical arguments for dualism are inaccurate, and there are a number of those. And number three, a positive reason that has been presented for Christian materialism is based on science and this thesis, that a scientific account of human activity can be given in physical terms only. Christian materialists don't use this as what might be called proof of existence, but as an indication that non-material souls are not needed. Okay, I'd like to give a quotation now from John Locke, a well-known early modern philosopher. John Locke was a dualist, but he thought that Christian materialism was a consistent position. He writes, all the great ends of morality and religion are well enough secured without philosophical proofs of the soul's immateriality. In other words, he thought that all the things that Christians want to maintain about people are consistent with materialism, with the thesis that people are purely material. And he thought this also about life after death, which is our subject for tonight. Even if we were purely material, God could restore us, Locke writes, in another world and give us retribution according to our doings in this life. So, technically speaking, a dualist could maintain the position that I maintain tonight. Typically, dualists do not, because one of the things that dualists appeal to in support of dualism is the claim that we live beyond the grave, and that in order to account for that, we need to believe in dualism. Well, okay, I'd like to address the consistency claim. I'm just giving some background here for the sake of kind of a picture or a context. This is one of the contentions that Professor Yandell and I will perhaps be focusing on. The question is, how can you believe that there is life beyond the grave if you believe that people are purely material? After all, bodies die, and there doesn't seem to be anything there. Well, the Christian answer here is that people will be resurrected. And the understanding, this comes from 1 Corinthians 15 primarily, plus other passages in Scripture. But the understanding of that resurrection is recreation. Recreation is, I'm not sure how to characterize it, but it's God's making new what has died. And the question is, how can you say that what has been recreated is the same as what was died? And that recreation presupposes that God is going to judge us, and we can't be judged unless we're the same person. So the attack by the Christian dualist is simply to say that it's not the same person, And so you need to postulate a non-physical soul, a non-physical substance that remains beyond the grave and which accounts for the identity of the person who lives beyond death with the person who lived before death. So that when God judges, God is judging the same person. After all, we are accountable for our sins, and duplicates of us are not accountable for our sins. Okay, well, I'd like to maintain that this recreated person is the same as the pre-death person. And what I'd like to say is that there's parity here. There's parity in some respects. It seems to me that the dualist has exactly the same problem that the Christian materialist has. After all, the Christian dualist believes in resurrection, and so the Christian dualist must also believe that the resurrected person is the same as the pre-death person, and must therefore believe that the body of the person is the same. And so whatever account that the Christian dualist gives of the post-death persons being identical with the pre-death person's body is an account that any Christian materialist could also accept. Am I on time? Yes. So that's my thesis with regard to the identity issue here. There are other issues that perhaps will come up in our discussion. But this, I know, is a central one that Professor Yandell, I know, is going to insist on. So I wanted to raise it and say what my thesis is, and we can speak to it at some point.
First, it's a pleasure to be here. As you may know, I am allowed on occasion to visit Trinity Seminary, and I lead an adjunct professor of philosophy of religion there, which is a delight to me, and I'm very glad to be here. Now my evening has begun. I will not say much about the exegesis of the New Testament. I am not a biblical scholar. I agree that dualism was a very early Christian view, held, I think, by Jesus and Paul, to pick two figures. If you want what I think is the best discussion of the New Testament teaching regarding this matter, it is to be found in a book by John Cooper called Body, Soul, and the Life Everlasting. And the evidence that the New Testament teaches a dualistic view of human beings is laid out there with the kind of exquisite care that, frankly, a philosopher always wishes that he or she could find in a biblical theologian, but does not always. I find myself unable to separate the question of consistency and the question of truth. Does survival of death require dualism? No, it requires either dualism or idealism. Idealism is the view that human beings are minds of a certain kind, and that what we call physical objects are simply experiences that human beings have that have conscious content. And while I'm not an idealist, idealism is perfectly compatible, so far as I can see, with the notion of life after death. Materialism, I think, is not. Or if it is in that peculiar sense that a self-contradiction is compatible with anything as well as being incompatible with anything. My essential problem with materialism is that I think that it's not merely false, but it's necessarily false. That there aren't any possible worlds in which it's true. And I'll now argue for that. There are varieties of materialism, and I'm not going to try in 8 minutes even to describe each of the varieties. Let me simply take materialism at its most straightforward. At its most straightforward, materialism is the doctrine that you are identical to your body. And hence, whatever happens to your body happens to you, and whatever happens to you happens to your body, because you're numerically identical to your body. Now, strictly, we all know that that's not true. I mean, none of us, when we clip our nails or go get a haircut, worry about our personal identity being threatened. The actual view is that we're identical to some crucial parts of our body. And I won't go into how much of us has to be around for that, whether the brain in a bat will do or whatever. Professor Williams is, of course, quite right that contemporary materialism has either like a bright sun likely today or like a cancer growing through the body. we disagree on which of those is the right metaphor. Then spreading through the Christian academic world. On the strict view of materialism, as I say, a person is identical to a body. So, there's you. Now, bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to die, and you'll be cremated, or buried at sea, or eaten by animals, or like Jeremy Bentham, almost mummified and put in a glass cage. But bad things are going to happen to your body. And on this view, they're going to happen to you. Now, there are two responses to that, or three, depending on how you want to count. The Christian philosopher of Notre Dame, Peter van Inwagen, says, what happens is this: you die, and a little speck of you remains. And in that speck, your life is dormant. And then at the last day, at the day of judgment, that speck is such that its life no longer is dormant. It's awakened. You used to be able at Walgreens to get this little package of dust, and these seahorses would come out. You poured the seahorses into the water, and first it's dust and then it's seahorses. And I guess according to the Van Inwagen theory, that's why there's a river in the book of Revelation mentioned in heaven. Okay? There's one view. The other view is by Kevin Corcoran, who teaches at Calvin. And on Corcoran's view, what happens is that, let T be the time of your death, or just before it, God then causes this body to cause both a corpse and another body that goes to heaven. And so suddenly your one body, zap, causes two bodies, one of which gets buried and one goes to heaven, or one goes to the immediate state. I mean, I've got to admit that the Christian materialists are inventive. There's a little problem. In fact, there are two. Let me state them as quickly and simply as I can. Here's one. There's a thing in philosophy that's called the principle of the necessity of metaphysical identity. And what lies behind that fancy phrase is just this. Let's suppose, which I imagine is probably true, that you are now the same person you were when you came into this room. What the principle of the necessity of metaphysical identity tells you is that there isn't any other person you could be. If you're identical to a person who came into this room, then there isn't any other person that you could be identical to than that one. But now think about this a minute. Here's a third view, by the way, I mentioned. It might just be that what happens at death is the various parts of you get scattered. And at the end, God reassembles you. Okay? And that's what happens. Resurrection is reassembling. So on this view, resurrection is the creation of a new body and a corpse. Two for the price of one. On this view, middle view, your survival is the survival of a speck in which your life is dormant. And on the third view, when you die, you just get scattered. Your atoms get scattered throughout the world. On this account, resurrection is the creation of two bodies, one of which is living and is you. Resurrection here, you drop the speck in the water and you get not the seahorse, but you. On this one, you reassemble. But now, if that can happen once, it can happen twice. And so there could be two bodies here, or two specks in which your life survives. Or you could be reassembled twice. The parts of you at 14 and the parts of you at 24 could all be brought back together. In each case, there'd be two yous, according to a physicalist or materialist view. You would be identical to each of two things that were not identical to one another. It is logically impossible that any one thing be identical to two things that are not identical to one another. Therefore, what materialism of this straightforward sort entails is that something that's logically impossible could happen, nothing logically impossible can happen, therefore this materialist view is self-contradictory, therefore it's false, therefore it follows both that you will be raised from the dead and you won't, and for contradiction anything false. There's a second difficulty. The second difficulty, if I can get it in quick, is this. It isn't possible that the sheer existence of something other than you prevents your existence. But now look at the scenario. If we got one speck, we get you, according to materialism. If we get two specks, we don't get you. If we got some other speck taken from your body, we'd still get you. So in a materialist view, the following can happen. The existence of, quote, two yous, unquote, can keep you from existing at all, even though they don't do anything to one another. They don't hit each other, hate each other, think unkind thoughts about each other. Now that's impossible. So there are two reasons why straightforward materialism is logically impossible. Anything logically impossible is false, hence materialism is false. Amen.
Turn it over to questions. You've got any questions of the
Yes, I agree with you that the Christian materialists are very defensive. And these views that you presented are so inventive that I must confess that I'm not tempted to go for them. First, I think they all presuppose the thesis that there must be some sort of continuity or some sort of material. But that's in both the pre-death person and the post-death person. But I'm proposing something different, something that I would think of as simpler and perhaps even more common sense. And I'm proposing recreation. So I want to ask you a question, just to kind of test here. I think I know how you're going to answer, but I just want to ask the question anyway. Just imagine that one of us up here disappears. Poof, gone. And of course, the audience is has quite a good deal of puzzlement and maybe even consternation. But let's suppose after maybe 20 or 30 seconds, the person comes back and just resumes talking, without apparent knowledge of this disappearance. Would you be inclined to say that this is the same person who came back? I mean, same physical appearance? That's my question. I guess I want a yes or a no answer.
You're not going to get a yes or no. That's one of the delightful things about this not being a courtroom. I wondered what you meant by recreate in your talk, and I figured we'd get around to that. It may be that, and you can tell me what you mean, it may mean that you mean the following, that it's perfectly possible that some physical thing not just become invisible. I mean, that I suppose is possible. For one thing, put a bag over it. Or for another thing, just scatter its atoms thin enough for a while. And, or make it completely transparent. But none of those things. If you mean by recreate, creation in a literal sense, to create something is to make it the case that there is something new, which is in no way made out of anything that pre-existed it. I mean, the doctrine of creation, as you know as well as I, is typically a doctrine of creation from nothing, where nothing isn't thought of as a kind of very, very thin stuff, sort of like tapioca with the lumps taken out. It means literally there not being anything. First there isn't anything, and then there is something. And the something there is isn't made out of prior stuff. Now, if that means by recreation, the creation of something, it then is annihilated, it doesn't exist anymore at all, and then it exists again.
Well, I'm happy to take either one of those. The kind of creation I mean is the kind of creation that God is going to perform on the resurrection day. I'm not too sure what exactly that is. There is some indication that we are going to be different. I mean, after all, 1 Corinthians 15 refers to us as having spiritual bodies. And I'm not too sure what a spiritual body is. I mean, if you take spiritual to mean incorporeal, then we've got an outright contradiction. So it doesn't mean that, but it does mean that there's something different about us from what we were in the pre-death stage. And for all I know, it could be the second of these. It doesn't seem like a reassembly. I mean, I'm not so sure why God would have to use the parts of us that existed. In fact, God isn't going to be able to use all of the parts. If God wanted to, God could use most of the parts. And that certainly would be sufficient to get us into to satisfy the continuity requirement. But if we've got the same personality, then we've got the same person. We've got everything else the same. That was the point of my question, for which I didn't get a yes or no answer. I mean, my supposition is that you would say, oh, Cliff, glad you're back.
I would, because I don't believe it's possible.
Thank you.
For you to be annihilated. But I mean, I don't think it's going to happen that you're annihilated. I mean, God could annihilate you. No doubt would never do this. You must be nice. But no, I would not believe you were annihilated. I would think something strange happened. That point, by the way, is epistemology, not a point of metaphysics. The metaphysics of the matter, which is what's relevant, is this. I mean, there are philosophers like Trenton Merrick's. If you want as good a version of this as I know of, it's a book called Objects and Persons by Trenton Merrick's. Merrick's teaches at the University of Virginia. He is a devout Christian and a fine philosopher. And Merrick's thinks that the following can happen: that a material thing can exist at time t, not exist at all, not be scattered, not be thinned out, but simply be annihilated for the next few trillion years, and then be recreated. Now, I don't know what to say. It seems to prove something is roughly to find something more evidently true than it is, from which it follows. And I don't know anything more evidently true than that can't happen, from which it follows that can't happen. I mean, it seems to me that if I give you my only copy, the only copy in the whole world of Ralph Cudworth's The True Intellectual System of the Universe, and you manage to utterly annihilate, then the best you can do is give me a copy of it. The best you can do, the best that can be done, is that an exact copy be made, which is not the original. I don't know anything more clearly true than that from which that follows. So I don't think recreation in that sense is an option. But by the way, on my view anyway, my body is just whatever body I am, i.e. my mind or soul, is embodied in. And so for me to get my body back is just for me to get a body which then is my body. And I, of course, agree with you about the peculiar, the unusual, the wonderful properties of a resurrection body, a body like unto the body of Jesus after Jesus' resurrection, which has very remarkable properties when compared with the bodies we have now. I don't think that reassembly is necessary. That's part of one materialist doctrine. I think what is required for something for me to be resurrected is for me to again be embodied in whatever kind of body a spiritual body is. But a materialist can't possibly offer that account. Materialist can't possibly offer the account that my resurrection body will be the body in which my soul is embodied, because of course the materialist doesn't think I have the dualist sense.
And maybe we've come across probably in a ways a basic difference, and as you say, it's difficult to prove it either way. I mean, I use my example to try to get your intuitions to see that yes, it is possible to have a recreation. Now, you cite the book case, but people are different from books, and it strikes me that if we've got a recreation, and we encounter this recreated person, and we ask this recreated person questions about their memories, and we look at who they are, we say, yes, this really is the same person. And it doesn't, it wouldn't matter to us that there was different matter involved. In fact, Scripture seems to indicate that there's different matter. So I think at this point we've just got different intuitions, and I'm not too sure how to prove it. You've got an example, I've got an example, and you claim that I think you claim it's logically possible. That doesn't strike me as true. I mean, it strikes me as possible for God to do because God will in fact do it. And I'm not claiming here that God is doing something that's contradictory. I don't think I've claimed that. And it's also possible. I mean, I think there's a parity here too, because I think the dualist has the same difficulty. I mean, I'm familiar with the possible duplication argument. I've always been puzzled by that. I mean, after all, suppose a non-material soul were duplicated. Which one would we say is the real you? So it's puzzling that dualists use this argument against materialists when it really could be used also against dualists. And so it seems that it therefore has no effect in either side.
Well, I suggest it doesn't apply to dualism at all. Dualism allows, if you like, the cloning. The cloning of the soul is just making a copy. So that if you've got a soul that exists, and then you make a copy of it, that needn't have any effect whatever on the original. The question is, which is the one that's been around? Well, suppose you can't tell. Well, then you can't tell. But we're doing metaphysics, not theory of knowledge. Whichever one, in fact, is the one that started out and is still around is the one that started out. The reduplication argument has no purchase on dualism at all. And in terms of just contrary intuitions, let's now check that one out. Here's a different kind of materialism. Different kind of materialism says, well, let's forget material substance. What persons are just material states. There's one material state or one collection of material states, there's another collection of material states, and if you're very generous to the materialist, and I will be, let's just suppose that material states can have dispositions, tendencies, feelings, habits. Not all sure that works out, but let's not worry about it. Okay? So personalities are identical to persons. Personalities are sequences of material states, one after another, with each member of the series caused by the preceding member. But then, of course, the states can branch. And the same kind of duplication issue arises if you think the person is simply a series of states, as if you think the person is a series of, or is a single enduring material body. Now here you can play the game on both sides of the street. Because it doesn't matter whether these are mental states which are identical to physical states, or whether they're mental states that are not identical to physical states. So what follows is that one ought to be a substance dualist. The one ought to be a really robust dualist, down to the ground. What a person is a mental substance, a thing capable of self-consciousness. So for any view in which there's a series of states, and that's what occurs identically, you get the same problems as you do for the more straightforward material.
But therefore it would not review materialism since the dualist has the same problem. Is that right?
No, the person, a dualist thinks there are two kinds of substances.
Correct.
For somebody who thought that persons were simply conscious states, and there aren't any conscious substances, then you can, then the duplication problem, and they don't affect each other, but they prevent the continuation of the person. Both those objections will apply. But to dualism, it won't apply. Dualism, it seems to me, is just not in any way whatever faced with the duplication problem. And the answer to what constitutes my survival in heaven is very simple. I exist as a mental substance, and I go on existing. And for a while I'm not in heaven, and then I am in heaven.
Could I ask a question about that mental substance? Do we have more time? Just a little bit?
We have about 5 minutes left. Maybe one more question for each of you.
Is this mental substance the person?
Yes.
Now that strikes me as something contrary to our everyday expectations about what a person would, and also contrary to the biblical conception of a person. I think here the intermediate state, so-called, the time between death and the resurrection. According to dualists, the intermediate state, there's just the soul. Well, it seems to me that the dualist has to say one of two things. Either this soul is the person, the sum and substance of the person, which Professor Yandell has said, or that it is a truncated person. If it's a truncated person, then at the resurrection, the soul and the body are going to be reunited, and we get the whole person. But Professor Yandell is not going for that position. Both of those positions strike me as counterintuitive and contrary to biblical evidence. According to the Bible, what we've got is a picture of people. See, I'm going to use the word holistic, as consisting of not just the psyche, but a whole sort of person. So to say that the substance, the mental substance of the person doesn't fit. I must confess, Professor Yandell hasn't gone for this option, but the dualists who do go for the option of the intermediate state as a truncated person are really paying a really high price, which the materialist doesn't have to pay. So, and this came out in Professor Yandell's remarks about the resurrection. The resurrection, see if I've got this right. Okay? Maybe you can answer yes or no to this. At the resurrection, we've got a whole person to which is added a body.
If you really want to know my view is this: that while dualists have done shockingly little to develop this point, I deny that the biblical teaching is holistic in this sense. But it is something like that. What dualists have shockingly ignored is the fact that according to the biblical data, it seems to me that we are taught that the soul of a human person is a soul that has capacities and abilities for relationships and communications that are best exhibited in relations with embodied persons, that the human soul flourishes best embodied, and it is different in that respect from other souls. And I grant you that dualists have been shocking in their lack of development at that point, and it has laid them open, or to appear to be open to criticisms which is not inherent to the position, but to criticisms which are appropriately directed at the lack of dualists to develop this thesis. Let me ask you a question in return. The Christian doctrine of the incarnation entails, indeed asserts, that Jesus Christ was perfect God and perfect man. One person, albeit two natures. According to materialism, a human person is identical to a human body. Clearly, God the Son is immaterial. God the Son is a spirit. How can one possibly give a logically consistent account of the doctrine of the incarnation that's materialist without maintaining the impossibility that an immaterial person has become identical to a material person?
Well, the materialist has two answers. Number one, the case of Jesus is different from the case of every other person in that every other person is purely material. But in the case of Jesus, we've got an immaterial deity residing in something material. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that divinity is exemplified in sinlessness, and the materialists don't find any difficulty in thinking of brains, acting, thinking, feeling, praying, choosing, and those are the sorts of things that go either towards sin or towards sinlessness. But this gets us into how to conceive of materialism altogether, not our first question. I think I'd better stop there.
Okay, now it's time to hear from you folks. Pretty good analysis of all positions given the time constraints. Are there anyone out there who has a question?
Does whoever wanted to have it on?
This question is probably more for Dr. Williams, but really either of you. I feel like a lot of discussion has focused on the resurrection and the afterlife in terms of heaven, but how would Christian materialism in particular look at hell, or would it have a conception of hell?
Well, thanks for that really good question. I don't think Christian materialists think about that too much, and I haven't. I think probably what I have to say is it's the same as for heaven. It's recreated persons who are being punished. I mean, we're talking about the metaphysics here, and what we've got is something physical that's thinking and feeling, and feeling pain in heaven, that sort of thing. So I would just go for analysis of what materialism is, analogous to what heaven would be. But of course, the opposite types of experience.
Oh, well, on my count, if you go to heaven, the good news is that somebody very like you is going to make it. The bad, on a materialist account, is that someone very like you is going to be there, and the bad news is you're not. And regarding hell, it's just the reverse. Careful copies, closest continuers, and the like are copies. They ain't here.
My question is primarily for Dr. Yandell. I'd like to know how you view the soul. Do you view the soul as something that's constant, immutable, totally unchanging, or does the soul change as the person progresses through life?
The soul changes.
The soul changes. Okay.
Perfectly compatible with being an immaterial being.
Now, if materialism, if one of the things that's against materialism is that you have a hard time establishing a sense of identity because of the fact that it changes, how do you defend the fact that the soul can be the source of identity if the soul also is a changing thing?
Well, I don't at all claim that a problem with materialism is that things change. I mean, after all, I'm a dualist. I think there are material substances and that they change a lot. So change presupposes There's a very strange idea in history of philosophy that change and identity are incompatible. But as Aristotle and Kant, among others, pointed out, change is a matter of something gaining a property that it didn't have or losing a property that it did. So if change occurs, there's got to be something that remains constant. And the distinctive feature of some worldviews, like a typical kind of Buddhism, is that there's an absolute denial of change. On that view, that there's just flat-out replacement. One state comes and then it vanishes and another one replaces it. So change requires continuity over time, requires the same thing exists throughout the process of change. And material things change relative to the kinds of properties material things can have, and minds change relative to the kinds of features that minds can have.
Here? Sure. I assume that in the material view of the soul, the material topics of the body is what the first, right? My question about moral responsibility. So, if in dualism, my soul has more responsibility to make choices that are good. In materialism, this looks like chemistry of the body, the mind, or something. It's produced my action or choosing or my choice. So it's very interesting how the moral responsibility can be tied to the material things. If something involved in my chemistry or any scene, idea of a scene is a kind of twisted formula of my chemistry of my brain or something. It's very hard to find who's the moral responsible. Is my material particle, atoms or something for my choices?
The materialist response here is to assert parity. Number one, materialist view is that brains think and feel, and if you believe in free choice, then brains have this free choice. The Christian materialist view is that God is capable of giving brains the ability to feel and think and choose. And once you've got those, you've got moral responsibility. That's the first point. The second point in this claim about parity is that it does not explain moral responsibility to postulate the existence of a non-material substance. That is just as mysterious as asserting that the brain has moral responsibility for the feel. What do you gain, asks the Christian materialist, by postulating this non-material substance? It has no more explanatory power. It has no explanatory power. If it's a mystery how brains think and choose and have moral responsibility, it's also just as much of a mystery to say that non-material substances think, feel, choose, and have moral responsibility. God, after all, is capable of creating non-material substances, souls, that have these non-material, that have these capabilities, and God is also capable of making brains and have precisely those. God, after all, is unlimited.
I mean, the scientific and biology know that human cells totally change in a certain period of time and discharge the load. So pretty much if God was morally totally accountable, my material parts of my body, which is my personality, was discharged somewhere else. So I'm really not accountable for my thoughts, things, because all my atoms in my body that was a year ago was accountable for one thing that they discharged, and now I'm a new person, I'm accountable only for a new thing. How does it work?
I'm not sure that's any more of a difficulty for the materialist than it is for the dualist. I mean, after all, Professor Yandell was just talking about change. The real question is duplication beyond the grave. That's where we have opposite intuitions. But if you're talking about change, the change of atoms in the brain, sure. It's a known fact. Every 7 years, all the cells, all the atoms in our body change. and clearly we're the same. In some sense, we're the same. In some sense, we're not the same. So that's no objection to materialism. Any more than would be an objection to dualism. I'm not sure.
But the change and replace is different things. Never mind replace in the past, not just change. Replace, totally replace. So all my body consists of something replaced, a new one which not been before, different replace between them.
But so why is that a problem?
Because I'm not more I than was 7 years ago, because all the atom was replaced, they're not part of my body anymore. They're not just, they were totally replaced, the new atoms came from the earth.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're clearly the same person as you were 7 years ago, at least in some sense.
In materials, you're not. I'm not, because all the atoms from my material body is charged.
Well, that's not the criterion of identity for materialism. Materialists, as far as I can tell, typically adopts similar sorts of identity criteria as dualists do. And I guess I'd like to ask Professor Yandell another question. What is the criterion for identity of the dualist position? Because here's my point. I mean, it seems to me that the identity criteria involve personality patterns, the sorts of things that we identify as desires, basic drives. Those, any dualist would use the same sort of thing. It seems to me that the non-physical substance is entirely irrelevant to determining identity. And no materialist is bothered by the fact that we change. I mean, that's not the criteria of identity. I mean, if I ask you what makes you the same now as when you were 11, for instance, you would tell me that you have some of the same personality characteristics, thought pretty much the same, have some of the same ideals. And those are the sorts of answers that introductory students commonly give me, and they're independent of whether or not dualism is true. Okay, somewhere in there I had a question, but I don't know if you want to answer it or not.
Let's distinguish between metaphysical identity conditions and epistemological identity conditions. I can make the distinction very easily. I won't bother at all. It'll be easy. Here we go. 2 pennies. Let's suppose they're both 1999. Let's suppose they're both dent per minute. No scratches on the one, they don't have twins on the other. Okay? This is lefty. This is righty. Righty seems to have had an accident. Okay? Is this lefty or righty? Now, I don't know, and you don't know. The question, is this lefty? I don't know. But here's something we do know. One of these things is lefty and the other of them is righty. And they've retained identity between the time we started and the time that is right now. Now, what makes them the same is metaphysical identity conditions. And what we've been talking about is metaphysical identity conditions. It seems to me that on any materialist account of identity of a body, you got to tell a complex story. For you to have the same body on a typical materialist account, you've got to have continuity. And these days, typically, materialists don't want to talk exactly about the identity of a body over time and make that primitive. What they want to do is to talk about a material life. And so long as you've got the same material life over time, you've got this, and it's the right kind of life, you've got a person over time. So in what seems to me to be the most interesting version of contemporary materialism is material life. That's the primary criterion. And bodies are simply particles caught up into that life. And it's the same body so long as you got the same material life, which is, of course, subject to the difficulties we've already talked about and that we've already noted that idealism and dualism are in fact not subject to. What's the story about metaphysical identity for a dualist or an idealist? It's a very simple, straightforward one. What it is to be a person is to be a self-conscious mental substance. That's what it is to be a person at a time. How does one differ from another in terms of their properties? If you want that account, I'll be happy to give you that account. Those of you taking my class tomorrow will see that account in painful detail, I mean in pleasurable detail. What makes the same what makes the same person the same self-conscious substance over time? That you started out as a self-conscious substance and you stayed in existence. So the metaphysical story is quite simple. Now, how do you tell if it's the same person? The reason I wouldn't give a yes or no answer to my disappearing colleague is that I don't know. I mean, my guess is that if that were to happen, he would have somehow become invisible for a while. But I knew that I mean, the very point is that the description doesn't give you enough metaphysical detail to give you an answer. And so if I give the answer that I'm inclined to give without my reason being able to give that answer, it's going to look like, though it's completely false, that I think there's any plausibility whatever in the view that something exists, altogether ceases to exist, and then exists again. There are possible cases in which visible stuff becomes invisible for a while, and then becomes visible again. I want to know metaphysically what's going on in the disappearance case. Tell me that, and I'll tell you whether the same person's around at the end. But anyway, that's my answer to the metaphysical identity question. The person is an essentially conscious and capable of self-conscious immaterial substance. And that's what a person is at a time. Over time, you got the same one as long as it just keeps existing. Doesn't have to do anything fancy. Doesn't have to play violin or learn new music. Just got to continue existing. Sure. Minds affect bodies and bodies affect minds. The idea that this is somehow a problem is one of the grand superstitions of philosophy.
And I concur.
Pretty great.
I think dualism is a hostile position.
The only time in philosophy that anybody still brings up the objection that mental events can't cause physical events and physical events can't cause mental events because they're so different, which really requires the premise that A can cause B only if A resembles B in certain respects relevant to cause. The only time the causal resemblance theory is ever trotted out in contemporary philosophy is to try to support this age-old difficulty, quote-unquote, with dualism that Descartes answered perfectly well. Suppose John has been courting Mary for 39 years, terrified of commitment. Finally, John wakes up and says, I'm going to do it. Calls Mary and asks her, Mary, will you marry me? Mary faints from shock. Well, all right, where's the resemblance? What was it in John's making that crucial phone call that resembled Mary's shock? The most interesting version, by the way, of the objection sort of behind your question that I know of is discussed in a book edited by Kevin Corcoran. And the title of it, since it's fairly similar to Cooper's title, escapes me. But it's a 2000 or 2001 book published by Cornell University Press, edited by Kevin Corcoran, and there's an article by E.J. Lowe. Lowe argues that minds can't affect bodies unless they're spatially located. And the view is more complex than that. That's the proposition. And Tim O'Connor in the next essay replies to Lowe. I don't think Lowe's argument works, but it's at least a new objection, and not just the old mental stuff and physical stuff is so different they can't causally interact. I mean, I've got a cold right now. The cold bacteria don't resemble the ache in my chest or my cough, but they cause it.
I've got one last question. It's kind of a summary question, and then I think we can be finished. Just trying to get my own head around what's been said so far. Professor Yandell, if I understand your position correctly, it's that the metaphysical continuity thesis cannot be maintained if you instill in the position annihilation at some point. You can't have both those two simultaneously. Even God can't maintain metaphysical continuity. It's a logical contradiction of terms. If annihilation is...
I wouldn't want to put it that way. I mean, there's no reason why God couldn't create the moon and keep the moon in existence absolutely forever. Right. My argument is simply that either materialism of the kind we've discussed, there's still other kinds of materialism. We haven't gotten into that. But the kinds of materialism we've discussed, and the view that what a person is just a sequence of mental states, both entail that something is possible, which is impossible. Namely, that one thing would have to be identical to two things which are not identical to one another. But I'm not at all claiming that God can't sustain material bodies in existence for however long God wants to sustain them, including everlasting.
But if they go out of existence,
well, if they go out of existence,
then they cannot come back as the same.
Right.
It's just by definition, that's not possible. Professor Williams, why is metaphysical continuity not important to maintain?
Well, my example shows, I think, that it's not important. I mean, intuitively, we'd say it is the same person. Also, God is going to resurrect the bodies, and they're the same, and they don't require metaphysical continuity. So, I mean, I guess, in general, what I want to say is that these questions of identity are controversial and still kind of out, so to speak, under discussion. And it's not clear to me that the dualist should hinge the belief of dualism on this. That's with respect to Christianity.
Very good. Well, I want to thank both professors for joining us, and we can give them a big hand. Either of them are going to run off immediately. If you have any questions you want to ask them in private, or please feel free to go out and all finish. Thank you very much.